Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Today's video is all about how I made this. Welcome to the channel. My name is Mason DRUMM, and I am a stop motion filmmaker based in Oklahoma City. First off, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed that sci-fi animated logo bumper. It was a ton of fun to make, and it was actually my very first stop motion piece of content that was broadcast on TV. So super fun. And the purpose of this video is to share with you how I made it and how I brought it to life. So this production was largely made up of two phases. There is the character design and then the set design. In this video, I want to talk about the set design and everything that went into that. I do have another video where I'll talk about this spider and how I built it and the process that went into making that, but that's going to be a whole nother video, and I'm going to save that for another time. So I got this video through Tongle, which is like a creative crowdsourcing platform. It's pretty great. I've done, I guess, now 4 videos now with them, and I've loved my experience working with them. And so for this video, SYFY wanted to show off their logo in a way that kind of subverts your expectations in a really creative, unique way. And so I had a handful of different concepts, ended up settling on this. I kind of call it an Indiana Jones aesthetic. You know, there's kind of ruinous. It's in the jungle, heavy stones, trap doors. That's kind of the vibe and the feeling that I was getting. So right now you're looking at my first initial test animation and also my motion control test, and I blended the two together. So you have this camera slider move pushing through a foreground, and then you have like this payoff animation where the stones turn to reveal the logo. So that was the general concept, and once that got approved, I was able to move on to set build and creature design. So this set was fairly simple. There's a 4x8 stage for the the main platform. There's a canopy on top of that held all the trees and the limbs and stuff like that. There was also a foreground stage where the automated slider would pass through, and I could also put like foreground elements like more trees and bushes and ground and stuff to kind of hide parts of the main stage that I didn't want you to see. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, I don't want to go too far into detail when talking about the spider design, just because I want to make that in a whole separate video, because that was a whole thing in itself. That was a learning process. I had to, we'll just save that for another video. But long story short, I had probably 7 or 8 different designs, and then once it was approved, that's when I just built everything out of styrofoam. And you'll see in this video, I use styrofoam for the entire production. It was a material that was readily available to me. It's easy to cut and shape. It's light, and it's super cheap. So that's why I'm using it. So here's an early look at the stage before there's really anything going on. And at this point, I was really looking at the motion control and the framing of the final like SYFY logos, because they had the SYFY logos have to land on the screen at a certain place. And so the first thing I do is I lock the tripod down relative to this stage, and I don't move anything after that. Once I do that part, everything else changes either in the ARCMO control system or the stage itself, but the camera and the tripod and the slider don't move from there. So once I had that locked down into where I liked it, that's when I could start planning on, how do I build the rest of the set, the foreground set around the slider and the camera move, and what does that mean logistically for everything going forward. And so you can see right here, this is just a really cheap 2x4 structure that I use with just spare wood. That has a platform right there for the foreground, like the forest floor, the jungle floor, and then right there is where I hang a lot of the trees and vines and stuff that you can see in the foreground. I am making headway on the hardscape of the set. So you can see right here, starting to come together, the trees. Got some ruins there. So I love using styrofoam. I think it's a great tool for a filmmaker to build worlds with. It's easy to shape, it's easy to cut. You can get a lot of different textures and variety out of it. I used I think it's called a table foam cutter. You can see it in the bottom right there. I'll show you a picture of it off the Amazon link. It's like $100, but this thing allows you to shape styrofoam with right angles and make what would essentially be really hard to do anywhere else in any other way, but like make professional looking logos and signs. And I've used it on a lot of my animations. You can see it right here. I was hired to animate another company's logo, and I was able to cut that logo exactly their font using the foam cutter. Now, one thing to keep in mind with foam is that it doesn't really take well to like a can of spray paint unless it's a water-based paint. It'll kind of melt it around. Now that didn't really affect me that much because the melting was a subtle effect, and that kind of made it look more aged. But for most things, you need to cover it with like a Mod Podge or some kind of like plaster for it to be able to receive the paint before you actually spray it, or else it'll just melt everything. And you can see here, that is why you need to wear a mask, because that stuff, you will just breathe it right in, and it's pretty toxic. So it's not a good thing for the environment. I don't necessarily like want to promote using something bad for the environment, but it's just too practical for somebody who needs to build worlds. But just please wear a mask, because that is a lot of smoke and stuff you do not want in your lungs. So I'm out doing some of the actual like testing of how the movement looks with the slider. So check this out, hold on. This is what I found. All right, so it looks pretty good, but one of the things that I want is to have the little spider creature crawl across here and then lay eggs on the ground. But if I do that, the SYFY has to be exactly where this is. There's some rules, like branding rules. So it has to be right there. And the way that I built the set, I had this like ledge, so there's no place for me to put the eggs without it kind of competing with the SYFY logo. So what I'm gonna do is make some stair steps that start like right here and like kind of go down. And then the spider will come here and then lay eggs kind of a couple on the stair steps like down here. And then it'll hop back up and do that. So that's the plan. Now I gotta go make some stairs. So once I build like the rough scape for the stairs, here I am checking what it looks like in camera, and I'm seeing that okay, it works. I still need to like go and like make it look good, but that will work for what I needed to do. And you can see kind of the foreground right here and how it blocks basically the ledge where it stops. So I'll make a little bit more changes to the stairs, make it look like a little bit more Aztecian, if you will, ruinous. And I'm using that wire cutter to kind of make it look like it's, you know, super old and it's got cracks and scrapes in it. So painting, weathering, building these sets is definitely like my favorite part of stop motion animation, I think. Just creating worlds, I should say, I guess. But there's something about weathering and making something look old and worn and dirty that I just absolutely love. I think I spent about 2 weeks set building, and at the time I had a full-time job working as a videographer for the University of Oklahoma, and so, you know, it was 2 weeks of me coming home at 5, hanging out with my daughter until around 7 until she goes to sleep, and then basically from like 7:30 to 1 or 2 in the morning building this set for 2 weeks until we got to the point where I could finally animate. Now, some of the pieces of stone were actually made using this. I think like this one specifically was, I believe, packaging for a printer. So it had these shapes, and I was like, man, I can use that, because they were kind of rounded at the top, but they had like right angles and stuff. So totally used that. Used the wire cutter to kind of cut out holes and other different like shapes and features into it, and the aesthetic just really worked well. I mean, you can see it kind of, if you look on the edges on the left and right of the cave, you'll see it on some of the back of these foam letters. You can see different shapes, and that was all just printer packaging. So the moral of the story is don't ever throw anything away, I guess. I won't go into a lot of detail, like I said, because there's going to be a whole nother video on it, but kind of a quick breakdown of the spider was, again, foam core, split down the metal. I used wooden dowel rods for the primary structure of the leg, and then just use armature wire to like connect the wooden legs to the body itself. I covered it with plaster strips, that you just soak them in water and then put them on whatever you're putting them on, and then they dry hard, and that allowed me to spray paint it to the color that I wanted. Right here you're seeing me paint fluorescent paint on the eggs, and there's kind of a quasi-finished spider, and there's a good look at like kind of what the legs look like, and I put that plaster wrap on the legs, on the entire body. So one of the biggest challenges with stop motion productions or set design is finding out where's the animator going to be and making sure that you have enough room and space for the animator to move in and out to get to the puppet or whatever it is that he or she is animating. And so that was really kind of like functionally the purpose of splitting the sets up into these two parts. You have like the main stage, and then you have that foreground platform that the camera was able to move through. Looking at that foreground platform right here, you can see how the actual camera slider was able to move, like slide down, and then as I got closer to the end of the rail or the track, I was actually able to move parts of the set out, and that's what you're seeing, like everything in the kind of the front half of that foreground set. I was able to kind of move out of the way, slide out of the way, rotate out of the way, as the camera was able to push near, so it didn't affect the actual movement. All the plants that you see are just basic plastic plants that you can find at Amazon or Hobby Lobby. Super great because I've definitely used all these on almost every project that I've worked on. Very reusable. The primary lights that I used were these Intelitech Pocket Cannon Minis. And then I had this RE350 lighting the foreground, kind of diffused through various different like plants and cut up foam board. I was really impressed with Intelitech Pocket Cannon lights. They're, I think I got them, 2 of them for $350, and it came with a whole bunch of like light modifiers with it. So a great deal. They look great, and the great thing about stop motion is you can just, slow your shutter speed down to make stuff brighter if the output's not strong enough. So, use that to your advantage. I also had this black light set up to kind of exacerbate the glow of the green goop that came out of the egg sac and the actual, bluish purple eggs themselves. So I enjoyed producing this video more so than most of my productions, and that's despite having a lot of issues. One of those issues was that I had spent, 2.5, 3 weeks in pre-production, getting the set ready, making everything work just so in, coordination with the slider, only for when I'm like 8 hours into the animation process, the slider craps out on me. And, I'd give it a benefit of the doubt if that was the only time it had happened, but I'd been using the slider for like 1.5 years. I used it to animate parts of the Iron Giant short that I did and a handful of other things. But boy, it is just super, how do I say this? It's not very consistent. It loses connection. There's no like hard line into the computer. It relies on a wireless connection. And so because of that, if and when it loses connection, it just entirely screws up your shot. So, here I am 9 hours into an animation just for the slider to crap out. Super depressing, so frustrating. I have a few holes in my garage wall where I may have thrown a hammer. Side note, if you want a slider for videography reasons, I would recommend it. I think it's great for that. It's cheap. I just wouldn't recommend it for stop motion use. So after the Noxon failed on me, I defaulted to a manual hand crank slider, which isn't ideal because, you know, I'm not gonna have like the nice smooth in and out as the motion control system can. But you know, if you look at the final video, it looks fine, and it works in a peach. So here I am animating for a second time the sequence, and I think I had gotten about 4 hours in when I got a call from my dad that something was up with my mom, go check on her. And long story short, my mom had a stroke as I was animating this. Now, I'm not telling you this to get sympathy points or anything, but I want to take the opportunity to brag on Tongle, which is the creator platform that I got this sci-fi gig through. Because sci-fi, this is for broadcast TV, so they're on a time crunch. There's a lot of moving parts beyond just the production that I'm doing and just the animation that I'm doing. There's other people involved with this. So all that to say, I had to like pause production on this entire thing for probably 3 weeks, you know, just so I could take care of my mom and be in the hospital with her. And the team at Tongle were super awesome. Just shout out to their whole crew for just being totally supportive of the creator and being in their corner. And my experience with them on this video and working throughout the last year and a half has just been really good. So I just want to brag on them because, you know, I'm kind of a workaholic, and I'm also maybe a people pleaser. So it was really gnawing at me that I like had this great opportunity, and I really wanted to like prove myself and do the best I could. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I can't do it. But they were like super supportive and enabled me to, you know, finish the project on the timing that worked for me. So just wanted to shout out to them. Eventually I was able to get back to animating. And on my third time's the charm, right? I was able to actually finish animating. And so what you're seeing right now is the time lapse of me on my final animation. It's the animation that you see in the final video. So post-production was pretty straightforward. I use Final Cut Pro to edit most of my animations in, which I know is really weird because they actually don't allow 15 frames per second timeline. So I have to animate on 2s in a 30 frames per second timeline, or in other words, I'm animating at 15 frames per second in Dragon Frame. And so let's look at the video. So here's the raw image sequence, almost straight out of camera. And then, you know, the first step was to remove the rig. And I do that in Photoshop. Add some smoke, some bugs, some atmosphere. And then we add the camera movement. So we push in for a 16:9 aspect ratio. I add some light rays. And then the next step is color correcting and grading the final video. Now if we watch it again, we can add the sound effects and the score. And that's that. Thank you so much for watching. I had a blast making this video. I love making these behind the scenes videos almost as much as I like making the actual video, like the animation itself. I hope it was insightful or helpful in some way to you and your creative endeavors. There's still plenty that we didn't touch on, so if you have any questions, sound off in the comments. I promise you I will respond to each and every one at length if I can. But yeah, definitely expect another video from this production about making the spider or the creature. There's a lot that went into that you don't see here, and I think it deserves its own video. But that's gonna be coming out hopefully in the next month or so. But like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. Thanks so much for watching, and take care.